What you're about to see will destroy everything you thought you knew about Bonnie and Clyde. These aren't movie scenes. These aren't romantic fairy tales. These are real photographs and real stories from one of America's darkest chapters. Before we dive in, hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Drop a comment with your thoughts when we're done. It helps keep real history alive. Now, let's uncover the truth. The pictures you're looking at right now, they're not from Hollywood. They're not romanticized legends. They're documentation of actual events that happened during America's worst economic disaster, the Great Depression. Think about this for a moment. Millions of families lost everything. Their homes, their savings, their jobs, all gone. Banks shut their doors forever. Factories went silent. Farm fields turned to dust. Entire families packed whatever they could carry and moved from state to state, searching for work that didn't exist anywhere. The country was drowning in hunger, abandonment, and anger. And when everything falls apart like that, when the system breaks down, that's exactly when crime explodes. Law enforcement? It was weak, scattered, and completely unorganized. Different counties didn't talk to each other. Different states worked alone. The chaos created the perfect environment for what came next. Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow didn't become criminals because they were born evil. They became criminals because they grew up watching everything collapse around them. Dallas, Texas. 1930. That's where their partnership began. Both were barely in their 20s. Both lived in poor neighborhoods. Both watched their families struggle just to eat. Both felt like the world around them offered no future, no hope, no way out. When they met, something clicked immediately. It wasn't just attraction. It was recognition. They saw in each other someone who wouldn't leave. Someone who would stay no matter what happened. Someone who understood. But here's what changed everything. Shortly after they met, Clyde got arrested for stealing cars and robbery. They sent him to Eastham Prison Farm. And that place, it changed him forever. What happened to Clyde in that prison is what turned him from a small-time thief into someone who believed he had no choice but to fight the system until death. Stay with me because this gets darker. Eastham was brutal. Prisoners worked in fields under armed guards. Violence wasn't just common. Sometimes the guards encouraged it. Clyde went in as a young car thief. He came out as someone who believed society would never let him survive legally. He was convinced that if they caught him again, they'd beat him, humiliate him, or kill him. That belief controlled every single decision he made from that point forward. When Clyde got out in 1932, he reunited with Bonnie. Their life together didn't start with dramatic bank heists or movie-style car chases. It started small. Gas stations, grocery stores, roadside cafes. They hit these places because they were easy targets that gave quick cash. But here's the truth nobody talks about. The money. It was terrible. A typical robbery gave them just enough to buy food, gas, and bullets. That's it. They weren't getting rich. They were barely surviving. Staying in one place for more than a day meant getting caught. So they never stopped moving. Constantly driving. Constantly running. Constantly looking over their shoulders. Clyde's biggest advantage? He knew the land. He studied the geography of Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Missouri, and Louisiana like his life depended on it, because it did. He knew which counties had slow police response times. He knew which small bridges could handle high-speed crossings and which would collapse. He memorized where dirt roads connected to highways, where fences could be cut, where forests provided cover. The Ford the 5.8 became his survival tool. Back then, most police cars couldn't match its speed and power. Clyde drove like a maniac, hitting speeds that made police vehicles spin out on gravel roads. He practiced these moves over and over. For him, driving wasn't transportation. It was the difference between life and death. The group that formed around them wasn't organized crime. It was desperate people with nowhere else to go. And what they're about to do will turn the entire country against them. W.D. Jones joined because he had no home and no family. Clyde's older brother Buck joined after trying to live a normal life and failing. Buck's wife Blanche became part of the group because she loved her husband more than she feared the consequences. Later, Henry Methvin joined, and his presence would eventually lead to their deaths. They didn't operate like professional criminals. They operated like people who were constantly escaping, constantly adapting, constantly reacting to whatever came next. Their robberies were always short and chaotic. Burst through the door. Point guns. Grab the cash drawer. Run. They didn't wait to crack safes. They didn't target big banks unless they had no choice. Speed mattered more than profit. The myth of Bonnie and Clyde as glamorous bank robbers? That came from photographs, not their actual crimes. Most of the places they robbed were small businesses already struggling during the Depression. Gas station attendants, shop owners, clerks, people who were already barely surviving. Their robberies hurt ordinary people. April 1933. Joplin, Missouri. Police raided their hideout. The gang escaped, but they left something behind, a roll of undeveloped film. When those photos were developed, everything changed. The pictures showed Bonnie smiling with a pistol and cigar, Clyde posing confidently with a shotgun. These images exploded across American newspapers. For a country crushed by economic failure, these photos seemed to represent rebellion. Two lovers against the world. That idea resonated with people who felt betrayed by banks, by government, by the system itself. But the myth was completely wrong. The real Bonnie and Clyde? They were exhausted, starving, constantly injured, and emotionally destroyed. What happened next to Bonnie will shock you. Summer of 1933. A car accident. Gasoline fire. Bonnie's right leg was severely burned. The burns went deep, damaging tissue permanently. She could barely walk. She needed Clyde's help just to move. The pain was constant and excruciating. No hospital would treat them. They used home remedies, primitive bandages, and whatever pain relief they could find. The newspapers didn't print this truth. The myth was more profitable. By early 1934, law enforcement started coordinating across state lines. The gang's escape advantages were disappearing. Officers stopped approaching suspicious vehicles casually. They approached with weapons ready. Bonnie and Clyde, believing that capture meant death or torture, fired first. This led to multiple police officers being killed during what should have been routine traffic stops. As the death count rose, public sympathy vanished. The label changed from outlaws to killers. April 1, 1934. Near Grapevine, Texas. Two young highway patrol officers approached what looked like a stranded vehicle. Clyde recognized the threat immediately. He opened fire. Both officers died. This moment destroyed any remaining public admiration. Newspapers stopped printing romantic stories. They started printing demands for immediate execution. Law enforcement turned to a man who didn't follow standard procedures. His name was Frank Hamer, and his plan to catch them was brilliant and brutal. Hamer was a former Texas Ranger who'd built his career hunting fugitives across rural territory. He understood patterns. He began tracking the gang not by chasing them, but by studying where they refueled, where they slept, and who helped them. He noticed something important. The gang always returned to Louisiana. They trusted specific backwoods areas and certain families. That trust would get them killed. Henry Methvin's father made a deal with law enforcement. If he helped capture Bonnie and Clyde, his son would avoid the death penalty. The ambush site was chosen carefully. Highway 154 near Gibbsland, Louisiana. The location provided concealment, limited sight lines, and no escape routes. May 23, 1934. Morning. Officers waited in silence along the roadside. When Clyde's Ford the Fifth 8 approached, he slowed down. He'd recognized the staged breakdown setup involving Methvin's truck. Frank Hamer fired the first shot directly at Clyde's head. The other officers opened fire. Automatic rifle rounds tore through the windshield, doors, and interior. Bonnie and Clyde died almost instantly. The entire attack lasted less than 30 seconds. Hook 10 minutes. What happened to their bodies next reveals something disturbing about human nature. Stay with me. When the bodies were transported to the nearest town, crowds gathered immediately. People tried to touch the bodies, tear pieces of their clothing, and claim fragments of the bullet-riddled car. News photographers documented everything. The myth didn't disappear. It transformed. The world saw not glamorous outlaws, but two young people destroyed by the life they chose. Bonnie was 23. Clyde was 25. They were buried separately. Bonnie's family refused to let them rest together. Their story became legend not because of who they were, but because of what America was at that time, a country desperate for meaning in hardship. Films, songs, and novels later turned them into tragic rebels. But the historical truth is harsh. They lived in fear, hunger, pain, and constant threat. They killed and were killed because the world had collapsed around them, and they saw no place in it. After the ambush, their bodies were taken to a funeral home in Arcadia, Louisiana. The funeral home was quickly surrounded by crowds. Men, women, and children pushed forward to see the bullet-torn car and the bodies. Some got close enough to tear fabric from Bonnie's dress or touch Clyde's hair. The coroner and police couldn't control the chaos. The crowd hadn't come to mourn. They'd come to witness the end of a story they'd been following in newspapers for 2 years. The Ford V 8 they died in was later displayed publicly. People paid money to see it. The blood stains remained visible. Bullet holes covered the doors, windshield, and seats. The vehicle became a traveling exhibit. Violence turned into entertainment. The reaction to their deaths reveals something shocking about Depression-era America. What happened at their funerals was unlike anything before or since. In Dallas, Clyde's family held his funeral first. Hundreds showed up. Some came from sympathy. Others came from morbid curiosity. Many came because they recognized the faces from newspapers and wanted to see if reality matched the photos. Clyde was buried in Western Heights Cemetery. He'd once asked to be buried beside Bonnie. That wish was denied. Bonnie's funeral followed. Her mother refused to allow them to be buried together. She believed Clyde had pulled her daughter into a life that destroyed her. Bonnie's funeral drew thousands. Streets were blocked. Cars lined highways. People stood on rooftops. Bonnie was buried in Fishtrap Cemetery, later moved to Crown Hill Cemetery. Even decades later, flowers, notes, and letters appeared at her grave. But the attention didn't end at burial. Newspapers printed special reports and reconstructed timelines. Radio programs discussed the meaning of the outlaw couple. Hollywood began drafting screenplays almost immediately. Songs were written that same summer. Some portrayed them as romantic martyrs, others as ruthless killers. The argument over who they really were began before the dirt settled on their graves. To understand why their image survived, you must understand the conditions they lived in. The United States wasn't just divided by class, it was divided by trust. The Depression didn't just destroy jobs and homes. It destroyed faith in institutions. People no longer believed banks would protect their savings. They no longer believed government could provide stability. They no longer believed the system was fair. In this environment, anyone who visibly rejected authority attracted attention. Bonnie and Clyde didn't represent ideology. They represented refusal. But while the myth grew, the real victims were forgotten. And their stories matter just as much. The families of officers killed during traffic stops never forgot. The children who lost fathers didn't write folk songs. The shopkeepers robbed at gunpoint didn't collect newspaper clippings. Their story is also here, silent, heavy, unglamorous. History that wasn't photographed, wasn't sung, wasn't filmed, but lived. That part must never be erased. In 1935, 1 year after the ambush, law enforcement agencies issued a report summarizing the Barrow Gang's movements, crimes, and escapes. The report emphasized 3 key failures. Lack of communication between jurisdictions. Sheriffs in different counties didn't share information effectively. Bonnie and Clyde used county borders as escape routes. Inferior equipment. Police vehicles and firearms were often outdated. The gang used stolen military weapons and faster cars. Underestimation of desperation. Officers expected criminals to surrender when surrounded. Bonnie and Clyde didn't. Their assumption that they'd be killed if captured made negotiation impossible. This report became part of the foundation for modern interstate law enforcement. Within a decade, police agencies had radio systems linking counties, then states. Patrol cars improved. Firearm standards were updated. Federal agencies took a more active role in cross-state pursuit. In other words, Bonnie and Clyde didn't just commit crimes. Their actions reshaped policing in the United States. Their story didn't end with bullets and graves. It transformed with each generation. And what each era chose to remember reveals more about us than about them. Writers, filmmakers, and musicians reshaped their story to fit different cultural moments. In times of disillusionment, they were portrayed as rebels. In times focused on law and order, they were portrayed as predators. Their story was retold more than it was studied. Each generation projected its own anxieties onto them. But the historical Bonnie and Clyde were neither heroes nor legends. They were 2 young people shaped by a collapsing nation, driven by hunger, survival instinct, and trauma. Their loyalty to each other was real, but loyalty doesn't excuse harm. They were both perpetrators and victims of their time. To speak of them honestly requires holding 2 truths simultaneously. They caused suffering and they suffered. They escaped authority and they were trapped by circumstance. They were admired and feared. They were myth and they were flesh. The United States in the years following their deaths remained a nation struggling to rebuild trust. The Great Depression had damaged not just bank accounts, but belief itself. The government launched new programs, jobs relief, financial reforms, attempting to reestablish confidence. But confidence isn't restored by law alone. It's restored by memory. And memory doesn't always choose what's accurate. It chooses what's emotionally useful. The memory of Bonnie and Clyde became emotionally useful. Some remembered them as symbols of defiance, two people who refused to be broken. Others remembered them as warnings, two people destroyed by the violence they embraced. And some remembered only the images. Bonnie with a pistol and cigarette, Clyde leaning against a stolen car, both smiling as if the world had never touched them. The photographs survived because they were simple. The truth survived only in fragments. And what those fragments reveal is heartbreaking. Look closely at the real record. Police files, witness statements, autopsy reports, private testimonies of those who suffered. A different picture forms. Fatigue, hunger, fear, infection, wounds that never healed, paranoia that grew with every passing night. The constant awareness that one wrong turn, one moment of hesitation, one misplaced trust would end everything. Their life wasn't an adventure. It was a narrowing corridor. With each mile, each robbery, each shot fired, the walls closed tighter and tighter. And yet, the idea of Bonnie and Clyde lived on. The idea was easier to carry than the truth. In American culture, stories of outlaws have always been more than entertainment. They're reflections of national tension. Moments when individuals pushed back against power structures. Jesse James, Billy the Kid, John Dillinger, Bonnie and Clyde. Each became symbols during times when society felt fractured. When people feel powerless, they become drawn to those who refuse to play by the rules. This doesn't mean admiration. It means recognition. Bonnie and Clyde weren't superhuman. They weren't fearless. They weren't strategic masterminds. They were two young people who believed the world had no place for them and responded by rejecting the world in return. Every decision after that grew from the first. If society had closed its doors, then society wouldn't be obeyed. But rejection isn't liberation. Rejection is a trap. The same path that frees someone from one cage builds another. The Barrow Gang lived in that trap for 2 years. It ended exactly the way such traps always end, in exhaustion, escalation, and death. Law enforcement didn't become stronger because of Bonnie and Clyde. It became stronger because it had to. And what that means for America today is more important than you think. The gang exposed weaknesses, jurisdiction gaps, slow communication, outdated equipment, fragmented authority. Their story accelerated the modernization of American policing. Radios became standard. Vehicle fleets improved. Interstate cooperation increased. Federal jurisdiction expanded. The legend of Bonnie and Clyde grew not because their crimes were exceptional, but because the consequences of those crimes reshaped institutions. The tragedy is this: they didn't intend to reshape anything. They weren't political. They weren't revolutionary. They were simply trying to survive in a world that had already failed them. Survival became a weapon. The weapon became identity. Identity became myth. And myth became the memory that outlived them. But myth has a cost. The families of the officers killed never saw romance in the story. The children who lost fathers didn't write folk songs. The shopkeepers robbed at gunpoint didn't collect newspaper clippings. Their story is also here, silent, heavy, unglamorous. History that wasn't photographed, wasn't sung, wasn't filmed, but lived. That part must not be erased. So what does the story of Bonnie and Clyde teach? Not that rebellion is beautiful. Not that love conquers the world. Not that freedom is found through destruction. Their story teaches that when structures fall apart, when hunger becomes normal, when stability collapses, when the future disappears, people will take paths they once believed impossible. And once that path is taken, it's almost impossible to return. This isn't about who Bonnie and Clyde were. This is about what made them possible. And that's a warning for all of us. History doesn't repeat through names. History repeats through conditions. If the pressure that formed them were to return, something similar would rise again. Different faces, different roads, different headlines, but the same roots. This is why remembering matters. Not the myth, not the glamour, not the movie version. The real story. 2 lives shaped by desperation. 2 lives consumed by violence. 2 lives that could have been ordinary in another time, another economy, another world. The story of Bonnie and Clyde is a mirror. It shows us not who they were, but who we can become when society breaks. Remember this story clearly. Not as legend, but as evidence of what the collapse of stability creates. When institutions fail, violence rises. When hope disappears, desperation replaces it. And when desperation becomes normal, tragedy follows. This is the real story of Bonnie and Clyde. If this video changed how you see history, hit that like button. Subscribe for more real stories that challenge what you think you know. And drop a comment telling me what shocked you most. History isn't just about the past, it's a warning about the future. Don't forget that.